Welcome back to Chess Tactic Today. In the Speed Chess Championship 2025, we've got a fiery clash between two of the fastest rising stars in the chess world, Arjun Erigaisi and Denis Lazavik. The game begins with a sharp Ruy Lopez, and before you know it, both sides are hurling pawns forward, launching attacks from every direction. Erigaisi shows his trademark creativity, while Lazavik counters with precise calculation and cold-blooded defense. This one is a tactical roller coaster, pure speed chess brilliance from move 1 to the very end. And we're off! Erigaisi opens with the king's pawn to e4, the most classic and aggressive way to start a chess game, immediately staking a claim in the center. Lazavik responds in kind with pawn to e5. We're heading into open game territory, promising a dynamic and tactical battle from the get-go. White develops the knight to f3, a natural move that attacks black's e5 pawn and prepares to castle the king to safety. And black develops his own knight to c6, defending the pawn and controlling key central squares. Everything is by the book so far. There it is, bishop to b5. We are in the Ruy Lopez, also known as the Spanish game. This opening is famous for its deep strategic ideas and long-term pressure. Black immediately challenges the white bishop with pawn to a6, asking the question, what are you going to do with this piece? Erigaisi chooses to maintain the pressure, dropping the bishop back to a4. He isn't ready to release the pin just yet. In response, Lazavik develops his other knight to f6, putting pressure on white's e4 pawn. This is the main line. A battle of plans is brewing. White castles kingside, getting the king to safety early. This is a top priority in almost every opening. A great tip for your own games. Black expands on the queen side with pawn to b5, kicking the bishop again and gaining space. Lazavik wants to create his own counterplay. The bishop retreats to b3, where it continues to eye black's weak f7 square and influences the center from a safe distance. And Lazavik develops his own bishop to c5, putting it on a fantastic attacking diagonal. This is a more aggressive setup than some other Ruy Lopez lines. A quiet but very important move from white, pawn to c3. This prepares to build a strong pawn center with d4 and gives the b3 bishop an escape square. Black plays pawn to d6, solidifying his center and preparing to develop his light-squared bishop. Both sides are building their positions carefully. And there it is, pawn to d4. Erigaisi challenges black's control of the center. The tension is starting to ramp up. Lazavik calmly retreats his bishop to b6, keeping it on that powerful diagonal while sidestepping the pawn's advance. White develops the bishop to e3, strengthening the center and preparing to connect the rooks. A very solid, logical move. Black follows suit, castling kingside. Both kings are now tucked away, and the real middle game fight is about to begin. White's knight comes to d2. This is a flexible developing move. The knight can support the center or jump to other squares later on. Lazavik brings his rook to e8, putting it on the same file as white's queen and bishop, creating some subtle X-ray pressure. Erigaisi wisely moves his own rook to e1, stepping out of that X-ray and preparing to support his e4 pawn. Black's knight jumps to the edge of the board at a5. The plan is clear, to trade off white's powerful light-squared bishop. Erigaisi refuses the trade, retreating the bishop to c2. He wants to keep his two bishops, a key strategic advantage. Lazavik strikes back in the center with pawn to c5, challenging white's d4 pawn and opening lines for his pieces. A big decision from white. Erigaisi pushes the pawn to d5, closing the center. This changes the entire character of the game. It's now a battle on the flanks. Right away, Lazavik's knight hops into g4, targeting the white bishop on e3 and starting to create threats on the king side. White's bishop moves to g5, pinning the f6 knight to the queen. A clever way to disrupt black's coordination. Black breaks the pin with pawn to f6. This is a necessary move, but it does create a small weakness around the king. A classic trade-off. The bishop retreats to h4, maintaining pressure and keeping an eye on black's king side. It's not done causing trouble yet. Lazavik pushes his c-pawn to c4, clamping down on the queenside and restricting white's pieces. He's cementing his space advantage there. Erigaisi plays h3, forcing the pesky g4 knight to make a decision. This is a standard way to deal with such an intruder. The knight retreats to h6. It looks a little awkward on the rim, but it's ready to jump back into the action later. White strikes on the queenside with pawn to b4. Erigaisi is challenging black's space advantage and trying to create his own counterplay. Black's knight on a5 was attacked, so it dutifully reroutes back to b7, heading for a more active square. And the pressure continues with pawn to a4. White is trying to pry open the a-file for his rook. The queenside is heating up. Black develops the bishop to d7, defending against white's queenside threats and completing his piece development. White pushes the pawn to a5, fixing black's queenside structure but also giving up the 4 square. A very committal move. The bishop tucks itself away on a7, where it's safe and still exerts long-range pressure across the board. Erigaisi begins a classic knight maneuver, bringing the knight from d2 to f1. Watch closely. This knight has a long journey ahead. Lazavik improves his queen's position, connecting his rooks and preparing to challenge white on the kingside. The knight's journey continues to e3. From here it controls key squares and eyes and attack on the kingside. A beautiful repositioning. Black does the same, rerouting his knight from b7 to d8. It's heading towards f7 to bolster the defense of the king. And here come the fireworks. Erigaisi lunges forward with pawn to g4. This is a bold, aggressive move, aiming to storm black's kingside, but it also weakens his own king. High risk, high reward. The knight arrives at f7, just in time to defend. A critical defensive maneuver from Lazavik. White's bishop moves to g3, getting out of the way of the g-pawn and preparing to support the attack. Lazavik's knight jumps back into the action at g5, challenging white's control of the kingside and creating immediate tactical possibilities. A calm move in the face of the storm. Erigaisi moves his king to g2, preparing to meet black's threats head-on. And here comes a shocking decision. Bishop takes knight on e3. Lazavik voluntarily gives up his powerful bishop to shatter white's pawn structure. He believes the long-term attack against the white king is worth it. This is a move of pure courage. White must recapture, and rook takes bishop on e3. The position is now incredibly unbalanced. Bam! Knight takes the h3 pawn, and this is an absolute thunderbolt on the board. This sacrifice rips open the files around white's king. Lazavik is going all in, exposing the white monarch to a ferocious attack. What a moment! Erigaisi has no choice. King takes knight on h3. The king is now dangerously exposed, dragged into the middle of the battlefield. Can he survive this? The attack continues. The other knight swoops into g4, now checking the king and threatening the rook on e3. The pressure is relentless. The king steps back to g2. A slightly safer square, but the danger is far from over. White is walking a tightrope. Lazavik plays knight takes rook on e3 with check. He wins back some material and further damages white's pawn structure. White recaptures with the f-pawn. Now white has doubled isolated pawns, but he survived the initial onslaught. The dust is settling, and the question is, whose position is better? Black brings his rook to f8, preparing to use the newly opened f-file to continue the attack. Erigaisi brings his queen to h1, a fantastic defensive and offensive move, eyeing black's king and preparing to swing over to the f-file. Lazavik repositions his queen to c8. It's a multi-purpose move, keeping an eye on the queen side and preparing for potential threats. White's rook slides over to f1, seizing control of the open f-file. This is a key strategic goal, and Erigaisi has achieved it. Black's queen moves again, this time to e8. It's looking for a way to get back into the kingside fight. A brilliant knight maneuver begins. Knight to h4. This knight is heading for the f5 square, where it will be an absolute monster, dominating the board. Lazavik plays pawn to g6. trying to control that f5 square and create a defensive shield around his king. A necessary precaution. Look at this! Erigaisi starts a king walk. The king moves to f2. He realizes his king is safer in the center, away from the open files. A very profound idea. Black's queen continues its dance, moving to e7, once again trying to find the best square to coordinate an attack. The king walk continues, king to e1. It's almost like he's castling by hand, bringing his king to the queen side where it will be much safer. Black doubles down on the f-file, bringing his rook to f7, challenging white's control, and the king march is complete. King to d2. What an incredible journey. The king is now perfectly safe, and white's pieces are ready to launch a counterattack. Lazavik doubles his rooks on the f-file, intensifying the pressure. The battle for this crucial file is reaching its peak. White shifts his rook to g1, preparing to use the g-file, which he opened himself with that earlier g4 push. This is long-term planning at its best. Black immediately contests the g-file, bringing a rook to g7. It's a tug-of-war for control of the open lines. A quiet but clever move. Bishop to d1. Erigaisi is rerouting this bishop to a more active diagonal, perhaps aiming for h5. Lazavik decides to follow suit with his own king, moving it to f7. The king feels it might be safer closer to the center. White's knight hops back to f3, a flexible square from which it can jump to several key outposts. And Black's king continues its journey to e8, mirroring White's earlier king walk. The kings are running for cover. The white queen lands on h6, a powerful attacking square. It puts immense pressure on Black's kingside and restricts the black pieces. The black king continues to d8. It's a game of cat and mouse, with both players trying to secure their monarchs before the final assault. White improves the bishop, moving it to e2. It defends key squares and prepares to join the attack. The king moves to c7. Lazavik is trying to get his king as far away from the action as possible. White seizes the h-file with his rook. Now Erigaisi controls the f-file, g-file, and h-file. His pieces are perfectly placed for an attack. Black shuffles his rook on f7, but it's becoming difficult to find a constructive plan. White's grip on the position is tightening. The knight returns to h4, once again setting its sights on that beautiful f5 square. The threat is looming. A defensive shuffle from Black, moving the rook back to g8. Lazavik is in pure defense mode now. Erigaisi is in no rush. He moves the knight back to f3, asking Black, "How are you going to stop my plan?" Lazavik offers a queen trade with queen to f8. He wants to relieve the pressure, but trading queens would probably favor White here. Of course, Erigaisi declines the trade. Queen to h2. He wants to keep the queens on the board to fuel his attack. The black king finds a new home on b7. It feels a little safer, but it's still a long way from being truly secure. The knight is back on h4. It's like a coiled spring, ready to leap to f5 at the decisive moment. And here we go. Out of nowhere, Lazavik lashes out with pawn to f5. This is a desperate but brilliant attempt to break free. He's trying to shatter White's pawn structure and create counterplay. Would you have found this move? It's a make-or-break moment that completely changes the game. White accepts the challenge. Pawn takes pawn on f5. The position has just been blown wide open. Black recaptures, pawn takes f5. Now Black has an open g-file for his rook, and his pieces are suddenly coming to life. Erigaisi calmly repositions his queen to f2, a central square where it defends and prepares to join the attack on the newly weakened black king. The king tucks itself into the corner at a rate. It seems safe for now, but White's pieces are lurking. A slight adjustment from White, king to c2, just making sure everything is perfectly secure before the final push. Black reroutes his bishop to c8, hoping to get it into the game and create some counter threats. White king shuffles to b2. Every move is about slowly improving the position and closing all of Black's doors. Lazavik triples his major pieces on the g-file, rook to g7. This is a massive concentration of force. The g-file is about to become a war zone. The bishop drops back to h2, a subtle but strong move, preparing to challenge black's control of the long diagonal. The black rook bravely advances to g5, putting pressure on white's position and daring him to make a move. Erigaisi switches his rook back to the f-file. He's adapting his plan, seeing that the f-file might be the key to victory. Black's queen moves to e7, a central post where it can influence both sides of the board. The bishop comes to f3, a fantastic square where it controls key diagonals and restricts black's pieces. The black rook retreats to g7. It seems Lazavik couldn't find a way to make progress on the g-file. The decisive breakthrough, pawn to e4. Erigaisi blasts open the center, creating a direct path to the black king. What a powerful move. Black is forced to capture. Pawn takes e4. But this only opens up more lines for white's hungry pieces. White recaptures with the bishop, and now this piece is a monster, slicing across the board. And this is the move black was banking on. Rook to g4. It's a vicious double attack, forking the bishop on e4 and the knight on h4. On the surface, this looks like a game-winning shot. It feels like white is simply losing a piece. Or is he? Wait a moment. Erigaisi completely ignores the threat to his bishop and plays knight to f5. What a stunning counterpunch. Instead of defending, he attacks, hitting black's queen on e7. He's calculated that after the exchanges, his attack will be faster. This is a moment of pure tactical genius. Lazavik takes the knight. Bishop takes knight on f5. He's committed to his plan, but is it enough? Queen takes bishop on f5. White's queen is now a dominant force in the center of the board, and the threats against the black king are mounting. Black's rook comes to g5, attacking the white queen and trying to generate some counterplay. White's queen gives a check from c8. The final attack has begun. Black's king is running out of squares. The king is forced to a 7. It's getting cornered. And here comes the killing blow. Rook to f8. This threatens mate on a8 and puts unbearable pressure on black's position. Black is forced to play queen to b7, desperately trying to block the threats and offer a queen trade to survive. But Erigaisi is not interested in trades. Queen to e8, keeping the attack alive and renewing the mating threats. Black defends with rook to g7, but it feels like he's just delaying the inevitable. A beautiful, quiet move. Bishop to f3. This attacks the g4 rook and prepares to clear the path for white's own rooks. The black rook swings to h4, a desperate last-ditch attempt to create some kind of counter-threat. Incredible! After that whole tactical storm, white calmly plays bishop to g3, and just like that, the rook on h4 is trapped. This is the decisive moment, the move that cashes in on all the previous brilliance. Black is simply losing a rook, and with it, the game. Lazavik takes the bishop, rook takes g3. It's the only move, but it won't save him. Rook to f7, a devastating pin on the black queen. Black can't move the queen without losing it, and white is threatening to capture it next turn. Black sacrifices the rook for the knight, rook takes f3. A final act of defiance. White recaptures, rook takes f3. The pin on the queen is maintained, and the attack is overwhelming. Black tries to block with rook to f4, but white has too many pieces in the attack. The other rook joins the party. Rook to g3. And the mating net is closing in. The last, desperate check from black. The king simply steps aside to a 3. There are no more checks, and no more hope for black. Black moves the rook to f7, but mate is unavoidable. Rook to g8. This move cuts off the king's escape and prepares the final blow. A futile attempt to block. Queen to d8. The queen now controls all the key squares. Another block, queen to f8, renewing the threat of mate on a8. Black can only shuffle the rook back and forth. And queen to f2 check. Lazavik sees the writing on the wall, and after this move, he resigned. A crushing victory for Erigaisi. What an incredible performance by Arjun Erigaisi. He navigated a razor-sharp opening, weathered a ferocious sacrificial attack, and then launched a masterful counter-assault to seal the win. A game full of twists, turns, and tactical brilliance. Thanks for watching Chess Tactic today, and we'll see you next time.